Hello everyone. So today I'm going to explain about the Spring Boot annotations, top 10 annotations, or maybe you can say those are basically frequently we are using in our project basically. So basically while we are creating any Spring Boot applications, so basically Spring Boot using Spring Boot application we have created in many purposes like if we want to create some REST APIs, those should be exposed and those should be consumed by some other third parties applications. So those due to this like we need to create the one Spring Boot application. So for creating the Spring Boot applications, we need to follow some kind of architectural things and all the we need to follow some annotations to remove the boilerplate code and all those things. So for those basically we need to like create use some kind of the annotation so that we can easily create the application flow, means we can directly focus on the business logic instead of creating the configurations and all those things. So due to this I will explain like those annotations, those are basically very frequently used in our project while we are creating. So I will go one by one, and then also I will give you some kind of the example so that you guys can understand like what is the purpose of using it and how we are going to use it. So let's take the one annotation that is basically it's mandatory to while we are creating any Spring Boot application. This annotation is Spring Boot application. So this is the kind of one based annotation that is basically we need to use if we are going to create any Spring Boot applications. So this annotation is basically is important class of multiple annotations that combines other three Spring Boot annotations like components can, those are the actually major actually annotation that it's combined Spring Boot application like components can configuration enable auto configurations. It is basically placed at the root package and the like meta annotations of this application, right? So as you can see, this is the entry point of this Spring Boot application class, so that's why it is placed over here. And if we click this Spring Boot application, so as you can see, it's combined this Spring Boot configurations, enable auto configuration, and the component scan. So these are also three major actually annotations that are basically used for the Spring Boot applications. Okay, so this is the basically fundamental things of this Spring Boot applications. And like using this Spring Boot annotation, we can easily configure the applications and take benefit of various feature provided by the Spring Boot framework. By integrating the multiple annotation functionalities, we can like reduce the boilerplate code to required to configure our applications. These annotations, Spring Boot applications that basically allow us to simplify the configurations of the Spring applications. This annotation basically help us to customize and modify the properties of the applications. As you can see over here, if we are going to use this Spring Boot application annotation, so in this way basically we can define these annotations over this top of this class. And if we're going to create any Spring Boot applications from the Spring Boot initializer, so those basically once we create, so it will automatically did those kind of configuration things over here. The next annotation that I'm going to talking about is the configuration configurations. Okay, so this configurations is a class-based annotation first of all, and that defines one or more bean into that particular class. Suppose if we want to create one bean, so I will talk about the bean annotation in the later on. But if we want to create any bean, a Spring Bean, then we can create inside of the configuration class. The purpose of the configuration class is to indicate the application context like service class and the other application component. We can create highly flexible and the efficient application that can adapt to requirement the changes quickly. Configuration annotation support importing, if we want to import some other classes into the configuration, that also we can do, we can achieve using this in the configuration classes. So Spring Boot custom annotation also can separate the configuration classes based on the domain or the functionalities. Configuration class can also activate or deactivate particular component based on some environment, or maybe we can put some conditional annotations over there. So we can, so there is one benefit of this one, like in the configuration classes is previously basically means before 2 3, or maybe in the old application basically we are supposed to use the XML for creating the bean and all those things. So due to this, like, the XML class looks very large and very complex, so we can easily remove the complexities from over there, so that like we can easily create those bean inside of the configuration classes. So that is also like we can get one kind of the benefit of this configuration class. Now let's say one example how we are going to create the use the configuration class. So let's take one example. Let's create one class. So for example, maybe we can say application configuration, app configuration, you can say. Okay, and over here, like, as it is a class kind of means class level annotation, so you can say configurations, this one. As you can see, it is coming from this org springframework.context.annotation. So it is a class level over here. Now inside of this class, as I was mentioning, we can create the bean also coming from this context, and here basically we can like create our bean, like maybe uh, load context. Okay, we can create our own bean, like there is no issues with this one. So this kind of thing we can we can also like create our controller, that also we can create the bean over here. Maybe if we are having one control, so I'll define later on all those things. Next annotation that I will talk about is kind of the path variable. So this path variable annotation is basically used to fetch the parameter, dynamic parameter we can say, from the request URL. Means whenever any request is coming from like any third parties, or maybe if we want to test from the postman, then basically we need to pass some parameters into the path, even though those are depends on your like how you are designing your APIs and all those things, if it is required or not. So that's you can define your own. So but the thing is that if we want to use a path variable, so this is basically used to like get the dynamic parameters from the request URI and map them into the method parameters in a controller. So the annotation, actually this annotation, path variable annotation, is basically helps to develop the like RESTful web services. It's allow us to manage the variable parameters. It enables to handle the incoming request and dynamic parameters without any complex code. Like with the path variables, we can define more accurate mapping while requesting URI and controller methods. By using the Spring Boot annotations, we can easily like customize those things and integrate it with other annotation in Spring Boot, such as like request mapping and all the things kind of like gate mapping, all the annotation that basically used to in while we are creating any REST APIs and all those things. So let me show you how we are going to use this path variable. So for that, basically we are going to create another class, which is basically we can define the controller. So for example, any controller, like maybe dummy controller or anything else, like we can define any name over here. Okay, so basically for defining the controller, I will like explain this annotation later on. Like I will also explain this one. Here basically we can put some request mapping, and here we can like provide the path, for example API, and then we can define like public, then maybe void, then get user by ID, for example. Okay, and here basically it's a kind of get APIs, so we can put the get mapping over here, and here we can provide also the path, like maybe the path variable. So for that we can define in this way, user ID, for example, or maybe directly ID. Then we can define over here at the rate path variable here, and then we can provide long or maybe string or something, that ID. Okay, so that basically we can use this, we can easily get the like the URL should be maybe your localhost, then IP slash API slash ID. So this is the ID placeholder basically. So instead of that, we can directly pass like 1, so that it will pick the ID as 1, and then accordingly it will fetch data from the database like, or maybe any service call or anything that we can write over here. We can write our custom logic over here. So that is the basically mostly the things or use of the path variable. That is the way actually basically we are going to use it over here. Next is to like the request body. So this basically request body, whenever we are creating any applications, web applications, e-commerce application or any applications, so from there basically some request will come into the any backend application, backend APIs. Okay. So while any request is coming over there, so like we need to pass some kind of data. Based on this data, like it will do some kind of business logic, and based on that it will return some data. So this request body indicates a method parameter that binds the HTTP request body into the controller method. The request body is mapped when any user send a request to the server. The request includes the data from the request body and helps to resolve the method. However, it depends on the content type, like whatever the content type is, maybe it's a kind of XML or JSON or text. So that also means define is needed. So based on that, it will basically deserialize those things, and the data can be, and then data can be received into the controller. So the data in various format, like as I mentioned, the plain text, XML, and the JSON. So this request body annotation is basically used to send used to send and transform the Java object returned from the controller to the resource dependency by the RESTful. Okay. So like if user want to send the body with details about the new user, or maybe some if they wants to save new user or maybe save new product, then basically it will use for the request body. So let me show you how it is actually used. So public void then saved user. Okay, and here basically it will be a post mapping, as it's having a like not construct, post mapping. Okay, here we can provide the path like /save, and then here basically we are going to use the request body. Okay, and here we can provide some kind of DTO, for example user and then user. So I need to create this user DTO, is that's why it's giving me the compilations issues. Refactor create, or maybe let me create one user DTO class user. Okay, I'm not putting any kind of variable over it, just to like demo purpose I am creating over here. So in this way basically we can use this one, and this user DTO having multiple parameters like ID, name, address, gender, and phone number, mobile number, communications. So all those thing information it will be inside means over there. So based on that it will mapped over here in this request body. So this is the basically use of the request body. Next is annotation is about to how we are going to inject all the beans over here. So the annotation is to AutoWare, that also basically used into our applications. So in Spring Boot annotations, like AutoWare is used to inject the dependency of one bean into the another. The Spring manage this object is implemented into another object that's a class needs to perform. When we annotate any field, a method with AutoWare, Spring Boot will inject the dependency automatically and find the bin that matches that field or parameter. This AutoWare annotation is basically used to, the injection can be done in a three ways basically. One is the field injection, another one is the setter injection, and other one is the constructor injection. So that depends that how you are going to inject your parameter or your service. AutoWare annotation in Spring Boot also like manage the entire life cycle of the object, like creation and also the do some kind of business logic and the destruction. So how we are going to inject the AutoWare? So for that basically we need to create one service. For example, we can create one service. For example, let me create one class like user service. Okay, and that should be annotate with @service annotation. That is also one annotation, so that I will explain later on. Now here basically we can use the AutoWare. This is the another options, like one of the options for injecting the bean user service. Okay, so this is the one of the injection using this one field injection, you can say. Another injection you can say like public, let me use a void, then like we can use some, or maybe we can use the controller over there, and here basically you can say user service, and then this dot user service equals to user service. That we can say like this is a constructor injection. Okay, so in that time this auto is basically not required. So this is also constructor injection, basically that also worked. And another was like set user service. We can create one method and then we need to use the setter over there. So that is also worked. So this is the option basically that we can use to for like inject our bean into the any service classes. Next is the REST controller, this annotation that I will talk about. So this REST controller basically combines the functionalities of the response body and the controller annotation. Response body means that I will explain. The annotations, this makes the creating the RESTful endpoints that maybe from the any whatever the get service it is, or that return maybe some data to the any consumer who is calling this particular API. So that may be return different types of format, like that also depends that what type of response you need, like XML, JSON, or maybe some kind of the text. So this REST control annotation in Spring Boot is also used to respond the plain text, images, or PDF document, right? In addition to that, Spring Boot set the HTTP response as default by with the REST control annotation. It can be customized also. By annotating the controller class with the REST annotation, we do not need to use the response body for request mapping method. Like response body means if we click this method, not this one, if we click this REST controller, then we can say it's having this response body is annotated with this one. That means if we are going to use this REST controller, then we don't need to return as a response body. Means suppose it's return some data, so for that basically we need to annotate this one with the response body, else it will not able to parsing those things. But as we are using the REST control annotation, so that's why we don't need to return the response body into the return type. So that is the thing. Next is about the bean annotation. So that I have used already over here. So what is the purpose of it? The bean is annotated with it's a method level annotation basically used in a Spring Boot application. Bean annotation is a direct analog of the XML element which indicate that the Spring container should register with the method. Spring Boot annotations are the like object that can be injected into other component or maybe into the other beans. It can alternate to the XML tag that I was talking about, and these bean annotations basically are the singleton in nature, like they can created in once and shared with the entire application context. And this is the syntax of this one bean annotation. Enable auto configurations. This is also like what you can say, like this is also very widely actually used, this enable auto configurations. If we click this one, so you can see this enable auto configuration is used basically over here. So if you click this, it's having lots of things actually. So these annotations basically allow the automatic configurations of your Spring Boot applications. This enable us to auto configure annotation to define the Spring component and configure them automatically. The auto configure beans basically are present in the class path and make actually work simpler for us by providing the required bean from the class path. Whatever we define the class path, so it will automatically create those things for us. We don't need to maintain manually anything. And to make it runnable the applications, it is doing the main job. In Spring Boot applications, enable auto configurations, actually this is considered the default package of the class. And if we don't want to like some classes into the auto configuration. Means if we want to exclude some configuration, basically those we don't need, then we can exclude those things. Like let me show you. Eh, like enable auto configuration, exclude. As you can see, here is the exclude. So here basically we can provide some names or something that we don't want to use. For example, if we don't want to use this one, then we can exclude this one. So something like that. We can also, if we don't want some dependencies into our class path, so that also maybe we can exclude from using this one. Next is the component. Component, the this particular annotation is used to mark the Java class in Spring mark the class as a Java class, mark the Java class in the Spring application. This is the kind of one annotation that is create the bin. This Spring IOC container basically manages the component annotation, and it is responsible for life cycle of the components like initializing, creating, or destroying them. Components can represent any object in the applications, including service layer, controller layers, all those things. Also, when the Java class marked with the component annotations, Spring Boot detected the component with the help of the class path. Components are used in the conjunction with the author and the qualifier also to inject the dependencies. Like component, like as I was saying over here, in the user service, so here basically we can use the, instead of service we can also use a component. So instead of service we can use the component. This is also behave the same one. So this is the basically use of the component annotations. And then come to the repository. The repository annotation is basically used to interact with the defined databases such as like maybe MySQL, Oracle, or any relational database, maybe NoSQL database. Also, like when any class is marked with the repository annotation, Spring Boot automatically create and add the required context for this one. The class annotated with the repository is an element of the data access layer and provides an API for interacting, which allows us to write the less code. The repository annotation is a marker basically for the class that perform the role of the data access object. And if you are using the repository annotation, then we can develop flexible and the reusable code so that we can easily interact with the any we can easily interact with the databases. So let me create one interface for that, like maybe user repository, and then here we can annotate with the repository annotation, and here basically we can define some methods. Then obviously we need to extend, we can use the extends the maybe JPA repository, so that as I'm not using the JPA uh, dependencies over here, so that's why I'm not able to use those things. So for that basically I need to use the JPA one, Spring Data JPA. This one is Spring Boot Starter Data JPA that we are going to use over here. Let me save this. It will take some time. So after like use this and use these dependencies over here, Spring Boot Starter Data JPA, then we can easily use the JPA repository that should be extended. And if we want to, we after explaining, I explain this repository. We can easily use the database methods like find by ID, save data into the database, save the find all, and all those things. We can easily use those methods. So those are basically very easily used. And so once we use this kind of JP repository, so these are the like basic annotation or topmost annotation that are regularly used while you are creating any Spring Boot applications. So that's all actually for today. If you guys have anything, please do let me know in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe my channel, press the bell icon for further notifications. Thank you guys for your time. That's all for today. Bye bye.